So we're now going to move on. I'd like to introduce my colleague, George Kinnear. Dr. Kinnear is a lecturer in the School of Mathematics at the University of Edinburgh. He has written a fully online course, and there is a sample week of that on our demo site. I would strongly encourage you to look at that, mostly because of the educational design based on well-established educational research principles that have been carried out in a systematic way in that course. So please have a look at that if you haven't seen it. But today, Dr. Kinnear is going to talk about some of the more advanced features of authoring questions. So, George.
Okay. My Zoom just does this thing where it doesn't show me people's faces, and it's kind of strange not seeing people. So just excuse me while I get that working. Okay, seems I can't see people. Right, so as Chris was saying, I've written a whole course online, and you can see an example of that on the demo site. What I wanted to talk about today was something that sort of worried me as I was putting all of this together. Because the students are spending so much time looking at these questions, I wanted them to look nice. And now some of this is maybe just me being overly pedantic, but I think some of it is quite important actually, that the students have a consistent experience as they go through working with the course materials. And I think some of the kind of extra features that I'm going to use make the question just more usable and nice to work with. So what I'd like to tell you about, first of all, is how to use Maxima cleverly. So we've got the power of the computer algebra system behind the scenes, and there are certain ways that you can use it more or less effectively. Then I'll share some tips about presentation, so how to make the questions look nice. And then finally, I know that there are some people interested in how to use multiple choice questions, and you'll see in the demo week that multiple choice questions do crop up. It's something that I've had some arguments with Chris about. So his kind of whole philosophy for STACK was to not use multiple choice questions. The point was the students type in an answer. But I do think they're useful in some ways, and we've been able to add in some extra features to make them a bit easier to write. So I'll share some examples of those as well. I should also say that I've got lots of links to the documentation in these slides. I'm going to make the slides available on the course website. And also all the questions that I'm showing, they'll be available as a quiz so that you can try them out, and also available to download, so you'll have all the code and you can work with these. So using Maxima. If you're authoring a lot of STACK questions, it's useful to have Maxima on your desktop. So you can download this windowed version of Maxima, which gives you the console you can type in and try things out. So I would definitely recommend that if you're doing a lot of STACK authoring. It's useful to be able to test things out before you go to typing them into the question form. It's not quite that simple though, because STACK has a whole lot of extra functions going on. So things like being able to do randomization, and there's many, many different functions that are in the documentation as well. So you can't use those in the Maxima that you just download off the internet. So there's a little step that you need to do to set up what's known as the sandbox. So that's all explained on the documentation. I guess I should admit at this point, I've not got the sandbox working on my laptop. I've not got around to sorting that out. It's working on the desktop machine in my office, but I've not got access to that just now. And I've not been authoring a lot of STACK questions over the past few weeks, so I've not got around to setting it up on my laptop. But that's worth it if you want to be able to really see what it's like to write a STACK question just on your desktop without having to go on to the Moodle server. So the point of using Maxima is to be able to do some powerful things when you're, for example, giving feedback. So you're writing your worked solution and you want to write out this integral, for example. So this is an example of a question where I was doing integration by substitution. So that's actually what I had in the worked solution. So here I'm writing some LaTeX, and within that I'm embedding the value a, which in this case was 2, the value b was 3, expression, so that's my Maxima expression, which is this whole rational function here. And then I'm differentiating, integrating with respect to, I've got a random variable for this, so I can change the variable that we're integrating with respect to. and that was the X there. So that's me taking really fine control of how I want the expression to appear. I'm having to write a lot of LaTeX code to do that as well. But you can actually just use Maxima to do this. So this is just saying integrate the expression with respect to v from a to b. And in Maxima language, putting in this apostrophe means don't actually do the integration, but just show it as an integral. And it gives us exactly the same result. And it's kind of easier to read, I think, as well. But there is an art to this, because once I've done the substitution, I might then want to do this, which is, just transposing the exact same expression. I've just changed things to what they need to be. And I might think, oh, well, in Maxima, I would just do it in exactly the same way. But unfortunately, Maxima does lots of simplification and things. So sometimes you find yourself fighting against the way that Maxima will want to simplify things. And sometimes you do need to take back control and use a kind of more spelling it out in LaTeX sort of way. But I would recommend trying to do this sort of way as far as possible, and only resort to having to really type lots of stuff out if it's not quite looking as nice as you would like it to. So there's that tension between having the simpler code by using clever Maxima and kind of taking control of how things appear. But I think it is worth learning, and there's an example from the docs that illustrates this quite nicely. So if you want to show the working for adding together two matrices, this would be a complete nightmare to write out by hand. If you had all of these individual entries and then you wanted to add them all up, you're going to have a massive piece of LaTeX at the end of that. In the docs, it shows you how to do it in just a few lines. So the key thing here is we can turn off Maxima's inclination to simplify everything. So once we do that, we take our matrices, we do this kind of cryptic looking bit of code, which essentially does the addition for us, and then turns it back into a matrix. And then we can produce that line above just by this simple line here. So it's much kind of neater and clearer. The key thing here is this thing about turning off simplification. So if you really want to have control and be able to show intermediate steps in working, it's important to be able to use that. And you can turn it on and off at will by using simp false or simp true. And if you do want to, so simplification is turned off here, but we can still simplify things with an explicit command, like evaluate this with simplification. So here's another example that would be an absolute nightmare to write out by hand. So this was a randomized thing where I wanted them to expand this binomial term to a certain power. And so all of this is randomized. And I wanted to be able to write out the full solution here. So I don't want to spend an awful long time going through all the code here, but just to say that this first line here is producing this line. So with simplification off, I'm producing a sum, so that's these plus signs here, of all the different terms that I make up as a binomial multiplied by a term to a power and another term to a power. So it's quite mathematical, and it's just like using sort of sigma notation. To go to the next line, I wanted to emphasize these multiplications. So I just wanted to point out this other feature that's sort of maybe not apparent from the documentation at first glance, but there is this option to control the way that multiplication is displayed. So my general setting here is that the multiplication signs are just kind of hidden, but I can, within the code, turn on multiplication being shown as a dot. So that's what happens on this line. And then for the final line, I make it blank again. So it's worth knowing that that's an option, so you can set it to either a blank, a dot, or a cross. So now turning to presentation issues and how to style your questions. So I've got 4 points that I'd like to cover here. So first of all, the idea of using HTML and styling. So I think by default on a middle server, this will be the editor that you would see. So if you're editing a question, you'll have this sort of what you see is what you get type editor. But behind the scenes, there's HTML code. So to see that, you click on this button on the editor, and then this button appears. You click on that one and it turns the text into the actual underlying HTML, and you can edit that directly. It's worth knowing that's there, because sometimes if you copy and paste things across, it will add in spurious HTML and make it look a bit of a mess, and you can go in and kind of tidy that up so it's just clean HTML. Another feature of this is that within the HTML you can apply consistent styles to things. So just at a trivial level, here's a question from my course, and throughout I tried to adopt the style that if I had multi-part questions, I would make these letters bold. I don't think it's a big deal, but I think it does help to give that sense of consistency if you're always doing things in the same way. So I'm not saying that's necessarily the thing to do, but whatever you decide to do, I think trying to do it consistently throughout your materials will make things seem more coherent. And in that vein, we're going to be hearing more after the break from Robbie about proof. And we've just added in some styles. So if you want to include proofs, you can style them using HTML as well. Just at this point, to give an extra plug to this Helm project that we've got going on. So there's this massive set of workbooks for engineering maths known as Helm. And what we're doing just now in Edinburgh is taking those and turning them into stack quizzes in the style of my online course. And we've developed a style guide for this. It's still a kind of work in progress, but the idea here is to produce these materials using styling in a consistent way. And you may not like the way these look, but then because you've set the questions up to use these styles, it's just a matter of then changing the styles, and the appearance of the questions will update correspondingly. So you can make those changes at a global level rather than having to go through all your questions and change each one. So a couple of new features to mention about Stack. These have just come in one of the most recent releases. So before, I had a few questions in my course like this where I wanted students to fill in the blanks in a piece of working. So this was in the idea of a faded worked example, where rather than have the students solve the whole problem, I want to show them a scaffolded version of it and have them fill in some parts of it. And it does get a bit messy if you've got kind of multiple boxes where you want students to put answers and you want to show them the validation, so how the system is interpreting their answer. So you end up with this massive set of boxes at the bottom. There is now a feature for compact validation, so you can turn that into this, where next to the box that the student's typing in their answer, the way that their answer has been interpreted appears directly. I've not quite decided the nicest way to use this yet, so I'm just being honest here and maybe get some feedback from people and see what you think. I put both of these versions in the quiz that you can try out. So it's using this new setting, compact. I'm not sure whether it's helpful to have it appearing and you've got kind of two versions of it in the same bracket, or if it's nicer to see what the whole expression looks like in a kind of separate place. I think it's nice here that you can see as you type, the change is happening right next to where you're typing. So there's a kind of trade-off there, which I've not quite resolved in my head. Another nice feature, so this is a question that I've talked about before from my course, where students type in what they think are the most important standard derivatives. And this had some issues, so again, I wouldn't want to have 9 of these big validation boxes at the bottom, so I had to just turn them off for that question, which I don't think was great, because if you miss a star or whatever, you're not going to get the helpful validation feedback. So now with the compact validation, it's possible to add those back in. But also the way the feedback works here, with the potential response tree feedback, I wanted to give feedback on each row, but then also give some overall feedback. And so this has inspired a new feature where we can now have different styles of potential response tree feedback. So in this case, we're just showing the symbol, so a tick or a cross, based on whether they're getting the marks or not. and none of the text that might be associated with the feedback. And there's also this option for just purely formative feedback. So there's no ticks or crosses or no marks associated with this potential response tree. It's just a sort of general evaluative statement. So it's useful to know that those are features that you can use as well for giving feedback. And it's possible to combine these. So I think having both of these new features for compact validation and compact feedback has made this question much nicer to use. So when students are typing in their expressions, they now see how the system is interpreting it. And I think the feedback just looks much nicer. Being able to make it purely formative takes the sting out of getting a red cross, even when you basically got everything right. So it's nice to have that option. Graphing. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. I think there are three main options that I've used. So first of all, just to embed a static image. And for that, I would recommend using SVG because it's a vector graphic. It means that students can zoom in and scale it as much as they want. And I would recommend using Inkscape, which is free software for creating those. It's possible to use Maxima's plotting commands. So there's an example question that you can see where I've produced various graphs of quartics, quintics, something like that. So that's just using a Maxima command, and it will produce a plot, again in SVG, directly into your question. JSX graph is another sort of powerful feature that's available. With great power comes great responsibility, so you need to learn how to use the features of JSX graph. And I have a session at the EAMS conference next week where I'll go into more detail about how I've used JSX graph in different ways in the course. Now finally, about multiple choice questions. I think these do have a place. So here, for example, this is just a basic question about a quadratic, but I want to know what type of stationary point it is. That's a natural sort of multiple choice question. The way multiple choice works, so here's an example of it being a drop-down. The way it works in STACK is that you provide a list of all the options. So this is a list of lists in Maxima code. So the teacher answer for this question is this list where the first expression is an actual Maxima expression. So that their answer is, in this case, the Maxima expression B. You set whether it's true or false, whether it's the correct answer or not, and then the text that they will see. And then when you are setting up your input, in this case I chose a drop-down list, and I supply this lists of lists as the model answer. And then when grading it, I just need to check that the student answer is indeed C, which is the correct answer in this case. So that's for a nice simple multiple choice. I couldn't be happy just with that, so I wanted to make life hard for myself. I've used multiple choice in lots of different ways, so I want to just share a few examples of that. So here I wanted to present different forms of possible equations for this graph. So here I've given what the correct form is as a Maxima variable, and now I've got a list of all the different distractors, so the wrong options. And these are specified in terms of my random variables A, B, and C. So that, in this case, will be 1, 3, and 5. But that will vary with the random versions. There is this helper function available. So a multi-selection question with display style, where you provide your list of correct options and then how many of those you want to select, and then your list of incorrect options and how many of those you want to select. And this function will take care of building the list of lists which you need to provide to create a multiple choice question. So that will be returned as the first argument from the first element of the result of this function. So that is what we want to make the teacher answer now, model answer for the input. And you can also easily extract from that what are the correct and incorrect options. Another example of this in practice, so I want to find all vectors parallel to a given one. So again, this was randomized, but just for example, so this was the V was this vector here, I produce a list of parallel and not parallel options. So these are just written using Maxima. So multiplying the vector v by 2, it is going to be parallel. So in that case, I've got 4 different parallel ones, 4 different not parallel ones. Okay, so you're seeing here commenting code is useful. I scratched my head and wondered what was going on here. It's because these are actually lists rather than vectors. So we want to turn them into column vectors because I wanted them to be displayed as columns. And now I do this multi-selection question alpha. So that gives each thing a name. So A, B, C, D. And I'm only selecting 3 out of the 4 in each case here as well. So each time a student tries a different random version of this, they'll see slightly different options appearing, which is a nice feature. So that's using these settings here. And a final example, just to show how powerful this can be, if I want to say which of these differential equations are separable. Again, it's just a matter of specifying in Maxima language. So these are 3 different separable ones, or it's 4 actually, and 4 different not separable ones. And then in each case, we're going to select 2 out of the 4. This one just also adds an extra feature where if they get it kind of partially right, we can try and give them some partial credit. So rather than just checking that they get exactly the correct set of answers, maybe if they've got identified a subset of the correct answers and they've not given any incorrect ones, we'll give them half marks. And otherwise, we'll give them some useful feedback about which ones were correctly or incorrectly selected. Okay, and that was me.
Thanks, George. I hope that's given folks some ideas. Let's look back at the questions in the question forum. So we've got a few minutes to ask George questions.
I saw that Sam and Heather were wondering about forbidden Maxima expressions, but I think Tim left some helpful comments in the chat. So I wonder, is there still a Sam and Heather? Do you still have questions for forbidden Maxima expressions, or is that all cleared up now?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the status of some things are. So when I was being really fussy about the way certain multiple choice questions were being displayed, I was having to use the string concatenation function. And I think Chris sucked his teeth when I said that. So that may not be allowed. I'm not sure.
It was just a general question. You know, if I had Maxima and was playing around with it, would I expect most things to work in Stack?
Yeah, so there are, we've had to restrict what you can use on the server. So expect anything that writes files to fail. We don't allow users to write files or read files off the server for obvious reasons. Commands which execute things like GNU plot to make the plots are restricted. So again, for obvious reasons. Because we have to check, Maxima is an open source project as well, and there are lots of contributed libraries. So we have to check what the libraries are really doing before we allow them. So, and there's one library, there's a package for graph theory, the discrete mass and graph theory. And that does some very strange file writing stuff, which is really a shame because the package would be extremely useful, but we just can't incorporate it at this point.
I'll watch out.
So well, I mean, we have carefully looked at what the functions do. So yeah, expect things to work, but there are good reasons why we're not allowing some things, and I'd be happy to talk about that in particular cases. Sure. Often it's you know, we allow things now. So if something's not allowed, it could just be simply that we haven't looked at it. There may be absolutely nothing wrong with it, and we'll just review it. If you really need it, we'll review it and allow it. But we're not just allowing everything and yeah, hoping.
Okay, thank you. I was going to suggest in George's slide where he showed the separate validation on like a fraction with brackets, that maybe if you did the different colors for the validation, then it would be easier for the eye to see what you'd put in and what it validated looked like.
Yeah, so you mean the input boxes versus the validation boxes,
Yeah.
having them appear sort of differently coloured?
Yeah, having it all in white was confusing, but I think if you had grey or something,
yeah,
the validation.
Yeah. So the compact validation, these other things, were all a result of people making suggestions, and I'm very open to suggestions. So yeah, we can certainly.
Look good.
The whole thing improves. What fascinates me is this is a tool, and people use it in ways I never anticipated and couldn't imagine. And often they're fighting against the system when it's a thoroughly sensible thing to do, and we should support it. So if people feel like they're doing something unnatural or fighting against it, like George's examples of the multi-choice builder functions, they're a real positive benefit that just save a lot of time and hassle. So, yeah.
Yeah, so that was an example of where Stack didn't quite do what I wanted it to do in an easy way. I was having to fight a bit, but then Stack just incorporated it to make my life easier.
Yeah. Thanks, George. I think you've some really interesting overview of some of the things you might not see straight away when you work through the Author Quick Start Guide and so on. But thank you very much indeed. And we'll follow up more specific questions in the forum in due course if people have got comments or suggestions there.
Yep. And just to add, the stuff is now available on the course page. So I've made available an example of all the questions that I showed, and the slides are there too.
But before you do that, the last speaker today